The sound of Cambria's heels clicking against our hardwood floor at 2 in the morning told me everything I needed to know. I sat in my garage, motorcycle parts scattered across my workbench, listening to her fumble with keys through the thin wall separating our house from my workshop. She was trying to be quiet, which made it worse somehow. "Working late again, honey," I muttered to the Ducati engine block in front of me, wiping grease from my hands with an old rag. Nothing says deadline pressure like giggling at your boss for 3 hours straight. The garage door between us might as well have been a canyon. 6 months ago, Cambria would have poked her head in, complained about the oil smell, maybe brought me coffee. Now she pretended this space didn't exist, just like she pretended I didn't exist most days. I'm Jace Arnell, 43 years old, and I fix computers for a living. Not glamorous, but it pays well enough to keep Cambria in designer suits and expensive wine. She works at Keller & Associates, the biggest advertising agency in our mid-sized Wisconsin city. Used to work there anyway. These days, she seems to spend more time at corporate events, client dinners, and late-night strategy sessions than actually creating advertisements. The house went quiet. I imagined her tiptoeing upstairs, probably rehearsing tomorrow's excuse about why she smells like expensive cologne that isn't mine. Porter Keller's cologne, specifically. I'd caught a whiff of it on her jacket last week when she thought I was asleep. My phone buzzed. Text message from my buddy Wilder. "You still up? Saw Cambria's car at the Marriott downtown around 11. Thought you should know." Wilder Sornell runs the MMA gym where I train 3 nights a week. Ex-cop, sharp eyes, doesn't miss much. He's been watching my back since this whole mess started, though I haven't told him the full story yet. Some things a man needs to figure out for himself first. I typed back, "Thanks. Yeah, I'm up. Working on the bike. Want company? I've got beer and bad advice." Rain check. Need to think. The Marriott. That was new. Usually Cambria stuck to the office building for her late-night meetings with Porter. The Marriott meant they were getting bolder, or maybe just more comfortable with their lies. I set down my wrench and really looked at my reflection in the chrome of the bike's gas tank. Tired eyes, stubble, grease under my fingernails. When did I become the guy who sits in his garage at 2 a.m., listening to his wife sneak around? When did I become the outsider in my own marriage? The answer was simple. The day Porter Keller decided he wanted what was mine. Porter inherited the agency from his father, along with the family mansion on Lake Winnebago and the kind of old money charm that opens doors in this town. He's everything I'm not. Smooth, connected, born into privilege. The kind of man who wears $1,000 suits and acts like the world owes him whatever he wants, including my wife, apparently. I stood up, joints creaking from too many hours hunched over computer keyboards and motorcycle engines. Tomorrow night was the annual Keller & Associates gala at Porter's mansion. Cambria had been talking about it for weeks, shopping for the perfect dress, getting her hair done, acting like it was the social event of the century. "You should come," she'd said last week over breakfast, not meeting my eyes. "It'll be fun. Good shrimp." Right, good shrimp. That's exactly why Porter Keller wanted me at his party, for my appreciation of seafood. I walked to the small window that looked out over our driveway. Cambria's BMW sat in its usual spot, engine still ticking as it cooled down. The license plate frame was new, I noticed. Keller & Associates, creating tomorrow's vision today. When had she put that on? My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not a happy smile. Something colder, more calculating. If Porter wanted to play games with my marriage, maybe it was time I learned the rules. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. Jake Morrison, security consultant. We'd worked together on a few IT projects, and he owed me a favor from when I'd recovered his client's data after a server crash. The phone rang twice before his groggy voice answered. "Jace? What time is it?" "Late, early. Depends how you look at it. I need a favor, Jake." "This better be good." I need surveillance equipment. Nothing fancy, nothing illegal. Just want to keep an eye on my own property. There was a pause. Your property or your wife? Does it matter? Another pause, longer this time. No, I guess it doesn't. When do you need it? Tomorrow, before the Keller Gala. That's cutting it close, but I can make it work. You sure about this, Jace? Once you start down this road, I'm already on the road, Jake. I just want to see where it leads. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. After I hung up, I sat back down at my workbench and picked up the wrench. The Ducati's engine needed rebuilding, and I had all night to work on it. Funny how some things fall apart slowly, piece by piece, until you can't ignore the damage anymore. And funny how satisfying it can be to take something broken and make it work again, even if you have to tear it completely apart first. The house above me stayed quiet, but I knew Cambria wasn't sleeping. She was probably lying in our bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Porter Keller, maybe planning her next excuse, her next lie, her next betrayal. Let her plan. I was planning too. The Keller mansion sat on 50 acres of prime lakefront property, the kind of place that made you understand why people used to have revolutions. I parked my 10-year-old pickup between a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling like I'd brought a butter knife to a sword fight. Cambria had ridden separately, claiming she needed to arrive early to help with setup. More likely, she wanted time alone with Porter before the evening's performance began. She'd looked stunning when she left the house, black cocktail dress, diamond earrings I'd bought her for our anniversary, hair swept up to show off her neck. The same neck Porter Keller had probably been kissing an hour ago. "You made it," a voice said behind me as I climbed the mansion's front steps. I turned to see Margot Venn, Cambria's best friend and fellow agency employee. She looked nervous, which was unusual for Margot. Usually, she had the confidence of someone who knew everyone's secrets. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Cambria promised good shrimp." Margot's laugh sounded forced. "She's inside already. Networking, you know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. "Thanks for the heads up." The mansion's interior was everything you'd expect from old Wisconsin money. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary. Servers in black and white uniforms circulated with champagne and those promised shrimp. The guest list read like a who's who of local business and politics. I found Cambria near the massive stone fireplace, deep in conversation with 3 men in expensive suits. She saw me coming, and her smile flickered, just for a second, before brightening into something that looked almost genuine. "Jace, you made it." She kissed my cheek, and I caught that scent again, Porter's cologne, faint but unmistakable. "Let me introduce you to some people." The introductions were a blur of firm handshakes and business cards I'd never use. I smiled, nodded, made small talk about the weather and the Packers' chances this season. All the while, I was scanning the room, looking for Porter. I found him holding court near the bar, surrounded by a group of younger agency employees who hung on his every word. He was telling some story that involved dramatic gestures and perfectly timed pauses, the kind of man who'd never had to work for attention because it had always been given freely. "Quite a place," I said to Cambria during a lull in conversation. "Porter's grandfather built it in the 20s, she replied, her eyes finding him across the room. "The family's been here ever since." The way she said Porter's name, soft, familiar, like she'd been practicing it, made my jaw clench. I excused myself and headed for the bar, needing something stronger than champagne. "Jameson, neat," I told the bartender. "Make that 2, said a voice beside me. I looked over to see a younger man, maybe 30, with Porter's jawline, but none of his polish. "You must be Jace Arnell. I'm Eli Keller, the prodigal son." Porter's son. I'd heard about him. The family disappointment who'd chosen art over business, travel over responsibility. Nice to meet you. Likewise. I've heard a lot about you. That was interesting. Good things, I hope. Eli's smile was sharp. Let's just say my father finds you fascinating. The bartender set our drinks down, and Eli raised his glass. To fascinating people and the trouble they cause. We drank, and I studied Porter's son over the rim of my glass. There was something there, resentment, maybe, or just the kind of cynicism that comes from growing up in a family where image matters more than truth. You don't seem like the corporate party type, I said. I'm not, but sometimes you have to show up for family obligations, even when you'd rather be anywhere else. He gestured toward the crowd. All this performance art gets exhausting after a while. Performance art. That was one way to describe it. Jace! Porter's voice boomed across the room. He was approaching with that politician's smile, hand extended for a shake that would probably last a few seconds too long. So glad you could make it. Cambria wasn't sure you'd be able to get away from work. I shook his hand, noting the soft palms, the manicured nails. Wouldn't miss it. Thanks for having me. Of course, any friend of Cambria's. He let the sentence hang, still gripping my hand. She speaks of you often. I'll bet she does. All good things, I hope. Naturally. His smile widened. She's quite remarkable, your wife. We're lucky to have her at the agency. The possessive way he said, we, made me want to break his nose, but I kept my expression neutral. She's talented, that's for sure. Talented doesn't begin to cover it. The Henderson campaign last month? Pure genius. We celebrated until quite late. His eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. I hope you don't mind me monopolizing her time these days. Big projects require big commitments. There it was, the challenge wrapped in corporate speak. He was telling me he'd been with my wife, daring me to react, confident I wouldn't make a scene at his party. He was right about the scene, wrong about everything else. I understand completely, I said, finally extracting my hand from his grip. Cambria's always been dedicated to her work, whatever it takes to get the job done. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, that I wasn't rising to the bait. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. Understanding's one of my better qualities. Porter excused himself to greet other guests, and I found myself alone with Eli again. Subtle as a brick through a window, isn't he? The younger man said. Your father? He's not really my father. Stepfather, technically. But he raised me after my mother married him, so I got a front row seat to his particular brand of charm. Eli finished his drink. Word of advice? Don't play his games. He's had more practice. Good advice, except I wasn't planning to play Porter's games. I was planning to change the rules entirely. The evening wore on. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have hosted a small wedding. I sat between a city councilman's wife and a bank president, making conversation about property taxes and interest rates while watching Cambria laugh at Porter's jokes from across the table. She was playing her part perfectly, the devoted employee, grateful for her boss's attention, maybe just a little bit flattered by his obvious interest. To anyone watching, it would look innocent. Workplace chemistry, nothing more. But I saw the way her fingers lingered when she handed him the salt, the way she leaned in just a little too close when he whispered something in her ear, the way she blushed when he complimented her dress. My wife was in love with another man, and she was terrible at hiding it. After dinner, the party moved to the mansion's library for cigars and brandy. I found a quiet corner and watched the social dynamics play out. Porter worked the room like the politician he'd probably become someday, glad-handing and backslapping, making everyone feel like they were his closest friend. Cambria stayed close to him, playing the role of trusted advisor, offering insights about clients and campaigns. They made a good team, I had to admit. Both attractive, both ambitious, both comfortable in this world of money and influence. Both liars. Having fun? Margot appeared beside me, her earlier nervousness replaced by something that looked like guilt. Fascinating crowd, I said. Everyone seemed so close. She followed my gaze to where Cambria and Porter stood near the fireplace, heads bent together over some document. They work well together. So I've noticed. Jace. She started to say something, then stopped. Never mind. What is it, Margot? Nothing. I hope you know Cambria cares about you. Interesting choice of words. Not loves you or is faithful to you. Just cares about you. The kind of thing you say when you're trying to soften a blow that's coming. I'm sure she does, I said, in her way. Margot looked like she wanted to say more, but Porter's voice cut through the room's conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The room quieted. Porter stood in front of the fireplace, brandy snifter in hand, every inch the gracious host. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Your friendship and support mean everything to me and to the agency. Polite applause. I noticed Cambria watching him with something close to adoration. But mostly, Porter continued, his eyes finding mine across the room, I want to thank the people who make our success possible. The dedicated employees who go above and beyond, who sacrifice their personal time for the good of the team. His gaze shifted to Cambria. People like Cambria Arnell, whose creativity and commitment have been inspiring. More applause. Cambria blushed prettily, playing the humble employee while basking in the attention. In fact, Porter said, reaching into his jacket pocket, Cambria left something at the office earlier, and I wanted to make sure she got it back. He pulled out a small black purse, Cambria's evening bag, the one that matched her dress, the one she'd been carrying when she left the house tonight. My vision narrowed to that small black purse in Porter's manicured hands. When had she left it at the office? And why was Porter, the agency's owner, personally returning an employee's forgotten purse at a party? The answer hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't left it at the office. She'd left it in his bedroom. Porter walked across the room, the crowd parting before him, and handed the purse to Cambria with a smile that was pure predator. Wouldn't want you to lose anything important. Thank you, she whispered, not meeting his eyes or mine. The conversation resumed, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about that purse, about the timeline, about the story they'd have to tell if anyone asked the right questions, which no one would, because who questions a successful businessman returning a forgotten purse? Everyone, except the woman's husband. I finished my brandy and set the glass on a side table. Time to go. But as I headed for the door, Porter intercepted me. Leaving so soon? He asked. The night's still young. Early day tomorrow, I said. Thanks for the hospitality. Of course. He extended his hand again, and this time I noticed something I'd missed before, a small scratch on his knuckles, fresh enough to still be pink. Drive carefully. The roads around the lake can be tricky at night. I shook his hand, feeling the scratch against my palm. I'll be careful. Thanks for the warning. As I walked to my truck, I could feel eyes watching from the mansion's windows. I didn't look back. I had work to do, and not much time to do it. The first rule of any good plan is knowing your enemy. Tonight I'd learned that Porter Kellor was arrogant enough to flaunt his conquest in front of the conquered. That was useful information. The second rule is knowing yourself. And I was beginning to understand that the man who'd walked into that mansion tonight wasn't the same one driving away. That man had been willing to ignore the signs, to hope for the best, to believe his wife's lies. This man was done hoping. I spent the weekend installing Jake Morrison's surveillance equipment while Cambria attended a client retreat at some resort 2 hours north. The cameras were small, professional grade, and completely legal since they were monitoring my own property. One in the garage, one covering the driveway, one with a view of our front door. Insurance purposes, I'd told our neighbor Big Lyle when he asked about the new hardware. Lyle was retired, nosy, and had opinions about everything from lawn care to local politics. He was also the neighborhood's unofficial information exchange. Smart thinking, Lyle had said, leaning on our shared fence. Crime's getting worse everywhere. Just last week I saw some fancy car parked in your driveway at odd hours. Figured it was one of Cambria's work friends, but you never know these days. A fancy car, at odd hours, while I was at the gym or running errands. What kind of car? Silver Mercedes, expensive looking. Driver never got out when I was watching, but I got a partial plate if you're interested. I was very interested. Monday morning brought the first test of my new surveillance system. I was at my desk, supposedly debugging a network issue for a local manufacturing company, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The driveway camera had detected a vehicle. I switched to the live feed, and there it was, a silver Mercedes S-Class, license plate matching the partial number Lyle had given me. Porter's car, parked in my driveway like he owned the place. The timestamp showed 10:47 a.m. Cambria had left for work at 8:30, claiming an early meeting with a potential client. Either she'd forgotten something important enough to send her boss personally, or they'd decided my house was a convenient place for their meetings. I watched Porter walk to my front door with the confidence of a man who belonged there. He had a key. My wife had given her boss a key to our house. The camera couldn't capture audio, but I could see them talking in the doorway before they disappeared inside. 43 minutes later, they emerged. Porter's hair was mussed, his tie loosened. Cambria was wearing different clothes than she'd left in that morning. They kissed goodbye on my front porch. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a full, passionate kiss that lasted long enough for me to screenshot it from 3 different angles. I saved the files to an encrypted drive and went back to debugging network issues, but my mind was racing. The arrogance was breathtaking. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. That afternoon, I drove to Wilder's gym for what had become my daily therapy session with a heavy bag. The place smelled like sweat and determination, filled with serious athletes and weekend warriors working out their frustrations on leather and steel. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Wilder said, wrapping my hands with practiced efficiency. He was built like a fire hydrant, short, thick, and nearly indestructible. 20 years as a cop had taught him to read people, and 15 years running the gym had taught him when to push and when to listen. "Something like that," I said, throwing a few tentative jabs at the bag. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Fair enough. But when you do, I'm here." I spent an hour taking out my frustration on the heavy bag, working through combinations Wilder had taught me, focusing on technique and power. Physical exertion had always helped me think clearly, and by the time I was done, I had the beginnings of a plan. That evening, Cambria came home with Chinese takeout and an apology for being late. "Client meeting ran long," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I brought your favorite. General Tso's chicken from Golden Dragon. It was my favorite, which made the lie somehow worse. She was still trying to be a good wife while carrying on an affair in our house. "Thanks," I said, accepting the container. "How was your day?" "Busy. Porter's pushing hard on the Morrison account. You know how he gets when there's a big deadline." I knew exactly how he got. I'd seen it on my security footage. "Speaking of Porter," I said carefully, "Big Lyle mentioned seeing a Mercedes in our driveway today. Said he was worried about break-ins in the neighborhood." Cambria's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, that. Porter stopped by to pick up some files I'd been working on at home. Didn't want to make him wait until tomorrow." The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost admired her skill. If I hadn't seen the footage, I might have believed her. "Makes sense," I said. "Good thing Lyle's keeping an eye on things." "Yeah, good thing." We ate in relative silence, and I found myself studying my wife across our kitchen table. When had she become a stranger? When had I stopped recognizing the woman I'd married? The answer was simpler than I wanted to admit. I'd never really known her at all. After dinner, Cambria disappeared upstairs to catch up on emails. I cleaned the kitchen and thought about my next move. The surveillance system was providing evidence, but evidence of what? That my wife was having an affair? I already knew that. That she was lying to me? Also not news. What I needed was leverage. Something that would give me control over the situation instead of leaving me as a passive observer of my own marriage's destruction. I opened my laptop and started researching Porter Keller. Public records, business filings, social media posts, local news articles. The man had lived his entire life in the public eye, which meant there were plenty of traces to follow. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: charity events, business awards, society page mentions. But buried in the archives of the local newspaper, I found something interesting. A small article from 15 years ago about a harassment settlement involving Keller and Associates. The details were vague, sealed by a confidentiality agreement, but the timing was significant. It was right around the time Porter had taken over the agency from his father. I dug deeper, cross-referencing names and dates, following paper trails through corporate filings and court records. By midnight, I had a clearer picture of Porter Keller's character. This wasn't his first affair with an employee. It probably wouldn't be his last. But it might be his most expensive. My phone buzzed with another motion alert. I switched to the camera feed and saw Cambria's BMW pulling into the driveway. She'd left the house 3 hours ago, claiming she needed to run to the store for coffee. The store closed at 10. It was now 12:17 a.m. She sat in the car for several minutes before getting out, checking her appearance in the side mirror, smoothing her hair. When she finally entered the house, I was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. "You're up late," she said, startled to see me. "Couldn't sleep. How was the store?" "What?" "The coffee run. You said you were going to get coffee." Her eyes darted to the empty counter where our coffee maker sat. No new coffee in sight. They were out of the kind I wanted. "I'll try somewhere else tomorrow." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as all the others. I wondered how many lies I'd accepted over the past few months without questioning them. "That's frustrating," I said. "Maybe I should start doing the shopping, save you the trouble." "No, that's okay. I don't mind." Of course she didn't mind. Shopping gave her an excuse to leave the house, to meet Porter, to maintain the elaborate fiction of our marriage while living an entirely different life. "I'm going to bed," she said, kissing my forehead with lips that probably still tasted like another man. "Don't stay up too late." I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of our bedroom door closing, the shower running. She was washing Porter's scent from her skin before climbing into our bed. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't notice. I was thinking about leverage, about evidence, about the difference between knowing something and proving it. Tomorrow I'd start building a case. Not for divorce court. That was too simple, too clean. Porter and Cambria had humiliated me in my own home, treated me like an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to learn that I was better at games than they thought. The Morrison account meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in the Keller and Associates main conference room. I knew this because Cambria had mentioned it Tuesday night, complaining about Porter's demanding timeline and the pressure to deliver a perfect presentation. What she didn't know was that I'd be attending as well. Morrison Manufacturing was one of my IT clients, and their CEO, Dave Morrison, owed me several favors from when I'd saved their company from a ransomware attack 2 years earlier. A phone call Wednesday morning was all it took to arrange my presence at the meeting as their technical consultant. "You sure about this, Jace?" Dave had asked. "Seems like it might be awkward, you being married to one of their people." "That's exactly why I need to be there," I'd said. conflict of interest concerns. I want to make sure Cambria's involvement doesn't compromise the project. It wasn't entirely a lie. Thursday afternoon found me walking through the glass doors of Keller and Associates for the first time in over a year. The agency occupied 3 floors of a downtown office building, all chrome and glass and modern art that probably cost more than most people's cars. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect teeth and an expensive haircut, directed me to the 14th floor. "Mr. Morrison's party is already in the conference room," she said. "Down the hall, last door on your right." I could hear voices through the conference room's glass walls before I reached the door. Porter's confident baritone, Dave Morrison's gravelly responses, and underneath it all, Cambria's laugh. The same laugh I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, now being used to charm another man. I knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. The conversation stopped. Porter looked up from his presentation materials with the expression of a man who'd just found a snake in his garden. Cambria went pale, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Jace?" Dave Morrison stood and shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Thanks for coming. Everyone, this is Jace Arnell, our IT specialist. Best in the business." "Mr. Keller," I said, extending my hand to Porter. "Thanks for having me." Porter's handshake was firmer than necessary, a dominance play that might have worked if I'd been intimidated. Of course, though I wasn't aware Morrison Manufacturing required technical consultation for an advertising campaign. "Due diligence," Dave said before I could respond. "We want to make sure any digital components align with our existing systems. Jace knows our infrastructure better than anyone." I took the empty chair directly across from Cambria, who was still staring at me like I'd materialized from thin air. "Don't mind me," I said. "Pretend I'm not here." The presentation resumed, but the dynamic had shifted. Porter's smooth confidence was replaced by something more aggressive, more territorial. He kept glancing at me during his pitch, as if waiting for me to challenge him. Cambria, meanwhile, had retreated into professional mode, speaking only when directly addressed, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. She knew I was there for reasons that had nothing to do with Morrison Manufacturing's advertising needs. The campaign itself was impressive, a multimedia approach that would showcase Morrison's commitment to innovation while highlighting their family-owned heritage. Porter was good at his job, I had to admit. Smooth, persuasive, able to read his audience and adjust his pitch accordingly. But I was reading him too, and what I saw was a man who wasn't used to being watched, evaluated, judged. He liked being the one in control, the one asking questions and setting terms. "The timeline's aggressive," Dave was saying, "but doable if we start immediately. What do you think, Jace? Any technical concerns?" I pretended to study the presentation materials, though I'd already spotted 3 potential issues. "The interactive website components look solid," I said, "but I'd want to review the data integration requirements before we commit to the mobile app features." It was a reasonable concern, the kind of technical detail that could derail a project if not handled properly. Porter's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm confident our development partners can handle any integration challenges," he said. "We've worked with them before." "On projects this scale?" I asked. "Morrison's database architecture is pretty complex. One compatibility issue could crash their entire customer management system." Now I had Dave's attention. Morrison Manufacturing had learned the hard way that technical failures could be expensive. "What kind of timeline would you need for a full review?" "A few days, maybe a week if we want to be thorough." Porter's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Of course we'd want to be thorough, though I should mention that Cambria has been working closely with our development team. She's quite familiar with the technical requirements." He was trying to put Cambria in the middle, make her choose between supporting the agency's timeline or backing my concerns. It was a clever move that revealed more about their relationship than he probably intended. "I'm sure she is," I said. "But Morrison Manufacturing is my client too. I have a responsibility to protect their interests." "Naturally," Porter said. "We all want what's best for the client." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but the real conversation was happening in subtext. Porter establishing his authority, me questioning it, Cambria caught between her professional obligations and personal complications she couldn't explain to anyone in the room. By the time we wrapped up, I'd successfully delayed the project by a week and positioned myself as an ongoing consultant. Porter shook my hand goodbye with the enthusiasm of a man touching a hot stove. "Interesting meeting," he said. "I look forward to working with you more closely." "Likewise, I think it'll be very educational for everyone involved." Cambria lingered as the others filed out, pretending to organize her materials while the room emptied. When we were alone, she finally looked at me directly. "What are you doing, Jace?" "My job. Morrison's a client. They asked me to consult on the technical aspects." "That's not what this is about." I closed my laptop and stood up. "What do you think it's about?" She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. She knew I knew. The only question was what I planned to do about it. "I should get going," I said. "Busy afternoon ahead. You probably have meetings to attend, files to deliver, coffee to buy." Her face flushed at the reference to her recent lies. "Jace, see you at home, Cambria. We should talk soon. Really talk." I left her standing in the conference room, surrounded by the materials for a campaign that would probably never happen, at least not the way Porter had planned. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave me time to process what I'd learned. Porter was arrogant, but not stupid. He'd recognized the threat I represented and would adjust his tactics accordingly. Cambria was scared, caught between two men who were using her as a pawn in a larger game. And I was just getting started. My phone buzzed as I reached my truck. Text message from an unknown number. "Saw you at the agency today. We should talk. EK. Eli Keller." Porter's stepson had been watching and apparently had something to say about it. I typed back, "When and where?" The response came immediately. "Murphy's Tavern, 1 hour. Come alone." Murphy's was a dive bar on the east side, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Perfect for a conversation that needed to stay private. I had an hour to spare, so I drove home to check my surveillance footage. The driveway camera showed Cambria's BMW arriving at 11:30 a.m. and leaving again at 1:15 p.m., just enough time for her to change clothes and prepare for the meeting. But there was something else. At 12:45, a silver Mercedes had pulled into the driveway. Porter, making a house call while Cambria was getting ready for the meeting they'd both attend. The timestamp showed he'd stayed for exactly 12 minutes. Long enough for what? A quick strategy session? Last-minute instructions? Or something more personal? I saved the footage and headed for Murphy's Tavern, wondering what Porter's stepson wanted to discuss. In my experience, family members who reached out to strangers usually had their own agenda. Time to find out what Eli Keller's agenda was. The tavern was exactly what I'd expected. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and the kind of clientele that valued anonymity over atmosphere. Eli was waiting in a corner booth, nursing a beer and watching the door. "Thanks for coming," he said as I slid into the opposite seat. "Wasn't sure you would." "Curiosity's always been one of my weaknesses. What's on your mind?" Eli took a long pull from his beer before answering. "My stepfather's making a mistake. Thought you should know." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that could destroy everything he's built. The agency, his reputation, his political ambitions." Eli's eyes met mine. "Your wife isn't his first affair, Jace. She's just the most dangerous one." Now we were getting somewhere. Dangerous how? Because this time he's not thinking clearly. The other women were transactions, expensive, discreet, easily managed. But Cambria's different. He's actually falling for her. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. An affair was one thing. Love was something else entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" Eli's smile was bitter. "Because Porter Keller has spent my entire life treating people like chess pieces. Employees, clients, family members. We're all just moves in his game. But chess pieces don't have feelings. They don't fight back. And you think I will? I think you already are. That meeting today wasn't about technical consultation. He was right, of course. So what do you suggest? Be careful. Porter's dangerous when he's threatened, and right now, you're the biggest threat he's ever faced. Eli finished his beer and stood up. But if you need help, information, resources, whatever, call me. It's time someone beat him at his own game. He left a business card on the table and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a half-empty bar full of strangers. I sat there for another 20 minutes, thinking about chess pieces and games, about love and revenge, about the difference between being a victim and being a player. By the time I left Murphy's Tavern, I'd made a decision. Porter Keller wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But he was about to discover that some chess pieces fight back. The next morning brought an unexpected development. I was reviewing security footage over coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison Manufacturing. Jace, we have a problem. Dave Morrison's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Someone leaked details about our campaign to our biggest competitor, the same campaign Keller pitched to us yesterday. I set down my coffee cup carefully. How do you know? Because Hartwell Industries just announced a nearly identical marketing strategy. Same themes, same digital components, even some of the same language. Either it's the biggest coincidence in advertising history or someone's been talking. Interesting. Very interesting. When did Hartwell make their announcement? This morning. Press release went out at 6 a.m. Dave paused. The only people who knew the details were the ones in that conference room yesterday. That's a serious accusation, Dave. You're talking about corporate espionage. I'm talking about protecting my company. We're pulling the account from Keller and Associates, effective immediately. I wanted to give you a heads up since your wife works there. After Dave hung up, I sat back in my kitchen chair and considered the implications. Someone at Keller and Associates had leaked confidential client information to a competitor. The question was who and why. My phone buzzed with a text from Cambria. Emergency at work. Won't be home until late. Don't wait up. The emergency, no doubt, was Morrison Manufacturing pulling their account and the investigation that would follow. But something about the timing bothered me. The leak had happened fast, less than 18 hours between the presentation and Hartwell's announcement. I pulled up my surveillance footage from yesterday afternoon. Cambria had arrived home at 3:30, gone straight upstairs to change clothes, then left again at 4:15. The cameras showed her carrying a manila folder that hadn't been there when she arrived. At 4:45, Porter's Mercedes had pulled into the driveway. I watched the timestamp as Porter entered my house with his own key, stayed for 23 minutes, then left carrying the same manila folder Cambria had brought home. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed didn't make sense. Why would Porter leak his own client's information to a competitor? What possible benefit could there be in sabotaging his own agency's biggest account? Unless the sabotage was the point. I spent the afternoon researching Hartwell Industries and their connection to Porter Keller. What I found was a web of business relationships, shared board members, and financial entanglements that painted a very different picture of yesterday's leak. Porter didn't just know people at Hartwell Industries, he owned stock in the company, a lot of stock. The Morrison account would have been worth maybe $200,000 in fees to Keller and Associates. But if Hartwell Industries landed a major client like Morrison Manufacturing, Porter's stock options would be worth 10 times that amount. He'd used his own agency to gather intelligence, then leaked it to a company where he had significant financial interests. And he'd used my wife to do it. But did Cambria know she was being used? Or was she just another chess piece in Porter's game? My phone rang. Wilder's name on the caller ID. You free tonight? He asked without preamble. Got something you need to see. What kind of something? The kind that's better discussed in person. Meet me at the gym at 8. The gym was closed when I arrived, but Wilder's truck was in the parking lot. I found him in his office, a cramped space behind the main workout area that smelled like coffee and old leather. Beer? He offered, pulling 2 bottles from a mini fridge. Thanks. What's this about? Instead of answering, he handed me a manila envelope. Had a friend at the police department run those license plates you asked about. Interesting reading. I opened the envelope and found a stack of photographs and documents. The photos showed Porter's Mercedes at various locations around the city: hotels, restaurants, residential addresses. The documents were surveillance reports, detailing times, dates, and locations. Your wife's boss gets around, Wilder said. 3 different hotels in the past month, always with female companions, always paying cash. I flipped through the photos, recognizing some of the women from the agency's website. Porter wasn't just having an affair with Cambria, he was running a stable. There's more, Wilder continued. My friend also ran a background check. Porter Keller has been married 3 times. All 3 wives filed for divorce citing adultery. All 3 received substantial settlements in exchange for confidentiality agreements. He's done this before. He's made a career of it. Rich, powerful man uses his position to seduce employees and clients' wives, then pays them off when things get messy. Wilder's expression was grim. The pattern's always the same. Charm offensive, expensive gifts, promises of career advancement. Then when he gets bored or they get too demanding, he moves on to the next target. I studied the photos again, looking for Cambria among the faces. I found her in the 3rd stack, entering the Marriott downtown, laughing at something Porter was saying, looking happy in a way she hadn't looked with me in months. The question is, Wilder said, what are you going to do about it? It was a fair question. The smart move would be to confront Cambria with the evidence, file for divorce, and move on with my life. Cut my losses and start over. But I wasn't feeling particularly smart. I was feeling angry, betrayed, and tired of being treated like a fool. I'm going to make them pay, I said. Wilder nodded like he'd expected that answer. What do you need? Information, access, and maybe some backup when things get messy. You got it. But Jace? He leaned forward in his chair. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Porter Keller has money, connections, and lawyers. If you come at him, you better not miss. I gathered up the photos and documents, feeling the weight of evidence in my hands. I won't miss. The drive home gave me time to think about strategy. Porter had been playing this game for years, perfecting his technique, learning from his mistakes. But he'd made one critical error this time. He'd underestimated his opponent. I parked in the garage and checked my surveillance system. Cambria's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she was still dealing with the Morrison manufacturing crisis, or pretending to deal with it while actually celebrating with Porter. Either way, I had the house to myself and work to do. I spread Wilder's intelligence across my kitchen table and began building a timeline. Porter's pattern was clear once you knew what to look for: target selection, grooming, seduction, exploitation, disposal. He was currently in the exploitation phase with Cambria, using her to gather intelligence and manipulate clients. But patterns could be disrupted, especially when the target had a husband who was tired of being a victim. My phone buzzed with another text from Cambria. Going to be very late. Crisis mode here. Love you. Love you. The casual cruelty of those 2 words, attached to a message explaining why she'd be spending the evening with her lover, was almost admirable in its audacity. I texted back, "Take care of yourself. See you tomorrow." Then I opened my laptop and began planning Porter Keller's downfall. The beauty of a good revenge plot is that it uses the target's own weaknesses against them. Porter was arrogant, predictable, and convinced of his own invincibility. He'd built his entire strategy around controlling information and managing perception. Time to show him what happened when someone else controlled the game. I worked until 3 a.m., building files, checking facts, and preparing for war. When Cambria finally came home, I was asleep in my chair at the kitchen table, laptop closed, evidence safely locked away. She kissed my forehead gently, probably feeling guilty about her lies, and whispered, "Sorry I'm so late." "It's okay," I mumbled, pretending to wake up. "Everything all right at work?" "It will be. Porter's handling it." "I'm sure he is," I thought. "Good. I'm going to bed." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably looking for signs that I suspected something. She wouldn't find any. I'd learned to be careful, to think 3 moves ahead, to plan for contingencies. Porter Keller had taught me well, even if he didn't know it yet. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. At the Keller holiday party, everything finally lined up. Cambria glowed on Porter's arm, while I played the quiet, forgiving husband with a whiskey in my hand and a thumb drive in my pocket. Around midnight, Porter strolled over holding Cambria's purse and said, loud enough for half the room, "I didn't realize she was your wife. She gave me quite an unforgettable evening." Laughter rippled, then died as red and blue lights washed through the windows. 2 detectives stepped in with uniformed officers, moving straight toward Porter and Cambria. I met Porter's eyes as the cuffs clicked. "Corporate espionage, harassment, securities fraud," one detective listed calmly, "all nicely packaged on an anonymous drive." Porter finally understood, his charm cracking. Cambria looked from him to me, realizing who had actually been studying whom. "Game's over," I said softly. "This house never belonged to you." As they were led past the stunned guests, I finally breathed freely, knowing their future address had bars on every view.